The room feels still, but the weight of what stands unspoken gathers thick in the air. There is a truth that cannot be ignored, an invitation to walk not by sight, but by something altogether deeper, stronger, more immutable. It is not a matter of mere sentimentality that whispers in the ear. It is something far more profound, a call to learn the discipline of trust in the unseen, trust in what steadies when all else trembles. So often, life seems poised on the brink of collapse, circumstances shifting like sand, hopes dashed against rocky shores, hearts battered by confusion and fear. In such seasons, trust must emerge as a lifeline, but not the fragile trust that crumbles under pressure. We need trust that anchors even when the horizon is obscured, the kind of trust that says, though the way is veiled, this path will not fail. But how does one learn such trust? How does a trembling heart, battered by uncertainty, step onto a foundation that cannot be seen, cannot be reasoned into existence, yet must be seized with all one's being? First, it starts with confession, not of sin, but of powerlessness. There must arise an honest admission, all the strength that I relied upon has been stripped away. Only when strength is exhausted does a radical alternative appear, reliance upon the unfathomable, the unexplainable, the transcendent. To confess powerlessness is not defeat. It is the primal posture from which trust is born. Then, the next step, calibration of affections. So many hearts are deflected by the glitter of comfort, the lure of ease, the promise of security in transient things. But every time trust is placed in what fades, disappointment follows. Learning how to trust means reordering affections so that what endures commands the heart. It means sitting at the feet of history's greatest examples, those who endured, not because of fleshly strength, but because their hearts clung to the invisible. And though we do not name the anchor, the pattern is clear. Those who trusted through famine, through rejection, through agony, emerged unbroken. That is the school of trust, learning to value the unshakable over the convenient. This school is not gentle. Trust is forged in the furnace of affliction, when health becomes frail, when resources vanish, when isolation tightens its grip. Those are the moments trust must prove itself. In the darkest hours, there must come a turning of the gaze, not outward at what fails, but inward at what remains unbroken. The human spirit is called to rest upon something outside itself, something beyond calculation. That rest, when applied, yields perseverance, not a hollow calm, but a resolute endurance. I will not relinquish hope. The heart says, this is not the end, but to walk this road requires something else, discipline. Trust does not descend as a spontaneous luxury. It must be practiced. One must train the mind away from anxious spirals, train the heart to recall histories of steadfastness, train the spirit in quiet groaning that becomes unspoken surrender. Daily, moment by moment, in every decision, big or small, choose dependence on what cannot be shaken rather than the fleeting. In every disquiet, choose remembrance of past provisions rather than knee-jerk panic. In every victory, celebrate not personal ingenuity, but the unmerited steadiness that sustained. That is how trust becomes habit. Let us not mince words. To train in trust is to refuse to be consumed by fear. Fear wants control. Trust relinquishes control. Fear cries, if I don't guard every crack, all will fall. Trust whispers, even if the whole house collapses, the foundation cannot. That is not a promise easily embraced. It seems irrational to our fragile minds, yet again and again history, the witnessing cloud of faithful, demonstrates this paradox. When all else fails, trust is sufficient. The furthest depths of despair, become springboards into serenity. The heart that learns this begins to walk differently. When friends betray or abandon, when dreams collapse, when plans disintegrate, there is a difference in how one responds. The debris of failure does not become an altar of despair. Instead, the fallen pieces are collected, and the heart says, "This is where I learned not to lean on my understanding." And in that soil, the seed of trust takes root. Out from ruin springs resilience, rooted deep in relinquished striving. It is not flight from reality. It is daring to stand when reality screams, "Fall." Now, consider what that does to ambition. Ambition fueled by anxiety is grasping. It demands assurance, but ambition anchored in trust is surrendered. It becomes pursuit without panic, striving without self-reliance. That kind of ambition is mighty. It does not rest on legs of sand. It moves like a soldier guided by command, calm, relentless, unwavering. It is not the passive drift of apathy. It is the focused advance of conviction, propelled by what cannot be thwarted. And when failure comes, as it inevitably will, the heart trained in trust does not collapse. Instead, it sees failure for what it is, a clarifying moment. I have been reminded that I am not the source, not a curse, but a gift. Trust does not avoid failure, it subsists through it. The heart murmurs, "This shows me more clearly where the foundation lies." From here, learning deepens, humility deepens, gratitude deepens, and the journey continues, not with blind optimism, but with calm confidence in what endures. There is a widening of vision in that place. No longer cornered by immediate loss or pain, the heart learns to grasp the broader tapestry. A single thread may snap, but when the underlying weave remains, the whole does not unravel. That is the way of trust. It teaches perspective, endurance, clarity, and from there, love emerges, not sentimental love, but love poured out that knows it does not save, but delivers. What about doubt? Doubt is the plague of modern souls. Can I really rely on what I cannot verify? But trust is not the absence of doubt. Trust is the stance taken despite doubt. The heart confesses, "I am not certain, and yet I will step." That is courage rooted in faint conviction. It is choosing to believe when logic would lean the other way. It is believing that beyond what is seen, there is that which sustains. That movement, to choose trust when uncertainty reigns, is the birthplace of faithfulness. So then, what do? You examine every preoccupation. What occupies your mind? What obsesses your desires? What do you talk about in those quiet moments? Let this be a mirror. If they reflect anxiety, frantic negotiating, fear of insufficiency, then you have not learned the lesson. If they reflect rest, gratitude, anchored hope, then you walk the path. Ask this: where do my resources come from? When adversity arrives, do I collapse inward, or do I lean outward onto what cannot be shaken? That question, answered honestly, reveals the state of trust. Moreover, surround yourself with testimonies, not the shallow clichés, but testimonies of those who have seen devastation, who have been ravaged, yet who emerged trusting more deeply than before. Read their stories, let their scars speak to you, and do not simply derive inspiration, derive indoctrination. Allow their steadfast hearts to commune with your own, because trust finds voice in community of the broken yet unyielding. And as trust grows, something shifts in how gnawing fear is faced. Fear screams, "This alone will undo you." But trust replies, "This is not a surprise. I have been directed here to learn not to lean on self." What would collapse a trembling soul now becomes a proving ground. A battlefield where trust either fails or triumphs, and through triumph, quiet, surrendered triumph, the soul is molded into someone who knows there is strength beyond sense. There is also a gospel in that trust, not the term, of course, but the pattern. One who came to earth in weakness, who was despised, battered, and broken. The pattern of walking in contempt, trusting where there was no recourse, making a way where none existed. That example, unspoken here, is the paradigm for what follows, remaining steadfast in abandonment, trusting when what was hoped for is not realized. That pattern is the crucible of character. It is the rhythm of peace in the gale. So learn to trust. It is not instantaneous. It is not a vow uttered lightly. It is a lifetime discipline. Each day, each moment, bring the heart to its knees, not in defeat, but in acknowledgement that reliance belongs elsewhere. In the silence, the heart whispers, I cannot, but I will. And out of that whisper emerges a roar of steadfastness. When circumstances shout despair, trust replies with calm assurance. When the world rends expectations, trust gathers the remains and says, this is where I found what never fades. When the future is hidden by storm yet to come, trust decrees, the unseen is my compass. That is knowing how to live, that is learning how to trust, not in outcomes, not in reason, not in safety, but in something that transcends all. And though no direct mention is made, the presence is unmistakable, that is trust. So may hearts be stirred out of complacency, may eyes be opened to the unseen anchor and fixed there, even when nothing else holds. Let every fear be met with the quiet voice, I will trust. Let every loss become a lesson. Let every dark valley become a classroom. And may the journey of trust transform the trembling into the steadfast, the doubting into the confident, the weary into the resilient. For there is something stronger than sight. May that be the path walked. Trust is not a passive feeling, but a daily, disciplined act of laying down self-reliance, especially in seasons of suffering, fear, and uncertainty. Only when personal strength is exhausted does genuine trust begin to grow. The soul must learn to rest not in outcomes, but in something unseen and unshakable. As trust is practiced, it reorders priorities, steadies the mind against fear, and produces a life marked by quiet resilience. It leads to perseverance in failure, calm in adversity, and purpose that is no longer driven by anxiety, but by confidence in what does not change. True trust is forged in surrender and affliction, not in comfort or control. That is not merely a phrase to be quoted. It is a reality to be lived and proven, often through the kind of pain that tears a man open and leaves him exposed before everything he thought he could manage. The notion that trust can be cultivated in the midst of luxury or ease is one of the greatest lies swallowed by a generation raised on convenience and infatuated with the illusion of mastery. Comfort does not teach trust. It breeds complacency. Control does not foster dependence. It feeds the deception of self-sufficiency. But when comfort is stripped and control is shattered, when a man is brought to the end of himself, there, and only there, trust begins to rise like a shoot out of dry ground. Consider what happens when someone is pushed beyond the limits of their own strength. They exhaust every option, reach out for solutions, try every method, and yet the walls still close in. It is there, in the tension of desperation, that the soul begins to whisper, I cannot hold this. And the echo comes back, not from within, but from somewhere altogether different. You were never meant to. Trust is not found in polished prayers or well-rehearsed songs. It is found when the soul is laid bare, when there's nothing left to prop oneself up. That is the forge, that is the fire, that is where something eternal is made. So often people are told, just have faith, as though faith is a feeling to be summoned, but the weight of affliction proves whether that so-called faith has any substance. It is one thing to nod in agreement during a comfortable sermon. It is another to cling with white-knuckled desperation when death knocks at the door, when the diagnosis is terminal, when the bank account is empty, when the silence is deafening. In that place, trust is not sentimental. It is not pretty. It is groaning. It is weeping. It is choosing to say, though I am undone, I will not let go. Affliction does not ask for permission. It comes like a storm that tears the roof from over your head, like a wave that drags you out past your ability to swim. It exposes, it humbles, it reveals where your trust actually lies. In moments of pain, every counterfeit refuge is brought into the light. You will see if your trust was in people, in money, in health, in intellect, in reputation. When all of those fail, and they will, you are forced to confront the only real question: is there anything left to trust in? This is where surrender comes in, and understand this. Surrender is not passive resignation. It is not the waving of a white flag because you're out of options. Surrender is the deliberate, costly choice to release your grip on everything you thought you needed to control. It is stepping back from the illusion of mastery and laying down your weapons, not because you are defeated by chaos, but because you are resting in something stronger than yourself. Surrender is saying, even if I do not understand, even if I do not see a way out, even if I lose everything I thought I needed, I will not retreat into bitterness or despair. I will lean on what cannot be moved. It is in the surrender that trust begins to take root. Not trust in some vague idea, but trust that has been tested in fire, trust that has felt the crushing weight of grief and still stands, trust that does not need all the answers to remain steadfast. And if you've never walked through the fire, you might not understand how powerful that kind of trust truly is, because it does not come easily. It is not birthed from study or theory. It is born in the midnight hour, when tears stain the pillow, when prayers feel unanswered, when the heart breaks over and over again. Comfort, on the other hand, breeds entitlement. It dulls the edge of dependence. When life is smooth, when plans unfold without resistance, when needs are met before they're even felt, there is a subtle shift in the heart. It begins to believe that it deserves the ease. It begins to confuse the absence of pain with the presence of favor. And in that state, trust becomes unnecessary. Why trust when everything is manageable? Why depend when everything is predictable? But the problem is, comfort is fragile. It is temporary. It can vanish in a moment. And when it does, the soul that has not learned trust is left crumbling. Control is an even more dangerous enemy of trust, because control gives the illusion of sovereignty. It says, if I plan enough, if I work hard enough, if I protect every angle, nothing will go wrong. And so people build their lives around strategies, defenses, contingencies. But eventually, life will introduce something that cannot be controlled. A tragedy, a betrayal, a season of barrenness. And when control shatters, panic enters. That is the test. That is the moment when trust must rise, not as a fallback plan, but as the only plan. There is no classroom like the valley. There is no training ground like suffering, because suffering strips you. It reduces you. It teaches you that you are not infinite. It shows you your weakness. And if you let it, if you do not run, it will also teach you the strength of trust. That trust is not a backup plan. It is the foundation. That in the depth of loss, when explanations fail and comfort is nowhere to be found, you can still stand, not because you are strong, but because you are held. Think about the moments in history, the moments in your own life, where trust was proven. They are not the sunny days. They are not the seasons of abundance. They are the nights when everything seemed lost. The hospital room, the courtroom, the funeral, the empty chair at the table. Those are the places where trust either collapses or is born. And the paradox is that those places, while agonizing, become sacred, not because of the pain, but because of what was formed in the pain. Some might say, why would trust require such suffering? But that question misunderstands the nature of the world. We are not promised a life free of pain. Pain is the universal language of the human condition, but trust redefines pain. Trust says, this suffering will not destroy me, it will refine me. Trust is what allows a man to walk through fire and come out not bitter, but better. Not hardened, but humbled. Not crushed, but anchored. Surrender does not eliminate pain. It transforms it, because surrender aligns the soul with a greater reality than immediate relief. It teaches patience. It produces endurance. It forges a kind of strength that is not loud, not boastful, but immovable. That kind of strength cannot be bought. It cannot be mimicked. It is earned through weeping and waiting. Through wrestling and resting, through lament and quiet confidence, there is a depth to people who have suffered well. You can see it in their eyes, a tenderness, a gravity, a peace that doesn't come from denial, but from hard, one trust. They are not shaken by every storm. They are not thrown off course by every disappointment, because they have walked through the fire, and they have learned that surrender is not weakness, it is wisdom. They have learned that affliction is not the end, it is the beginning of a deeper knowing. And for those who are in the middle of it now, those walking through pain, those whose hearts are crushed, it must be said plainly, this is not meaningless. This is not wasted. The fire you are in can either consume you or cleanse you. You can either cling to control and fall apart, or you can open your hands and say, even here I will trust. And the remarkable thing is this, trust, once chosen, begins to sustain. Not all at once, not with fireworks, but like steady rain on parched soil, it begins to nourish. That nourishment does not always look like deliverance. Sometimes trust means continuing even without resolution. Sometimes it means waiting without closure, but in that waiting, in that choosing, a miracle happens. The soul grows, the roots go deeper, the wind may blow, but you remain. You begin to see that the goal was never just survival. The goal was transformation. Trust transforms the sufferer. It transforms how we see ourselves. It strips away pride. It reveals our limits. It forces us to rely on something unshakable, and that reliance begins to change everything. Even joy is redefined, not the shallow joy of circumstances, but the resilient joy that says, I have nothing left, and yet I am not destroyed. That joy is a gift only suffering can give. That joy cannot be stolen. Because it is not based on what is held, but on what holds you. So when people ask, how do I develop trust? The answer is not complicated, but it is costly. Lay down the need to understand everything. Release the demand to control outcomes. Walk into the fire if you must, not with arrogance, but with surrendered confidence. Trust will not always remove the pain, but it will carry you through it. And on the other side, should you live to see it, you will not be the same. You will not be weaker for having surrendered. You will be stronger, not with the strength of defiance, but with the strength of dependence, not with the strength of one who never breaks, but one who has been broken and rebuilt. That is the strength that endures. That is the kind of trust that does not fail. That is what affliction produces. That is what surrender forms. Trust transforms the heart, reshapes ambition, and sustains endurance. Not in theory, not in abstraction, but in the very flesh and blood of life as it is, gritty, uncertain, often marked by pain and disappointment. There is a kind of transformation that does not come through information or exposure, but only through surrender. Trust is not learned in the classroom of ideas, but in the field of testing. And when trust is truly forged in the heart, it does something radical. It changes the direction of desire, the definition of success, and the capacity to remain steadfast when everything calls for retreat. The heart is not a neutral organ. It is not a blank canvas waiting for experience to paint upon it. The heart is active, longing, yearning, reaching, every day whether it knows it or not. And in its natural state, the heart craves security, validation, comfort, and affirmation. These cravings drive people toward whatever seems to promise them the quickest satisfaction. But these cravings, left unchecked, often become chains. The heart that is untethered from trust becomes vulnerable to deception. It will chase shadows, it will bow to whatever screams loudest, it will place its hope in fading things, but when trust is introduced, not shallow trust, not the kind that collapses under pressure, but deep, abiding trust, something begins to shift inside the heart. The heart begins to learn a new rhythm. It is no longer ruled by panic or pride. It no longer needs to grasp for every possible outcome. It finds an anchor, a fixed point, and slowly, over time, the affections of the heart are reordered. The things it once treasured begin to lose their luster. The things it once feared begin to lose their threat. A quiet confidence begins to grow, not born of arrogance, but of assurance. This transformation is not immediate. It is gradual, sometimes it is painful. It involves a revealing, a confrontation with the illusions the heart once clung to. The process of trust transforming the heart often begins with disillusionment. Things once idolized fail. People once depended upon fall short. Plans once pursued unravel, and the heart is left asking, "What now?" It is in that ache that the seed of trust begins to grow, and as it grows, it teaches the heart to love differently, to desire differently, to rest differently. What once brought satisfaction no longer satisfies. What once seemed urgent now seems trivial, and the heart that was once frantic becomes still, not numb, not passive, but content. Trust transforms discontent into peace, not because the circumstances have changed, but because the lens has changed. The heart begins to see that peace is not the absence of trouble, but the presence of something greater than the trouble. As the heart changes, so too does ambition. The natural ambition of man is to exalt the self, to be known, to achieve, to accumulate, to secure status. This ambition fuels much of what the world celebrates. But it is fragile, it is anxious, it is exhausting, because it is rooted in self-preservation and self-glorification. And when those ambitions are blocked, the soul becomes bitter. When those ambitions are fulfilled, the soul becomes proud. But in both cases, the soul is restless. When trust enters, it reshapes ambition. Ambition no longer becomes about what can be achieved, but about what is right, about what is eternal, about what serves instead of dominates. Ambition rooted in trust is not weak, it is not lazy, it is focused, it is strategic, but it is no longer consumed with personal elevation. It is consumed with faithfulness, it is driven by a higher calling. And because of that, it is not shaken when recognition does not come or when success looks different than expected. This new ambition does not compare, it does not compete. It celebrates what is good, even when that good is happening in someone else's story. It labors hard, but not for applause. It endures setbacks, but does not despair. It is ambitious not for greatness in the eyes of men, but for obedience in the unseen. That kind of ambition is rare, but it is the fruit of trust. When you trust that your value is not measured by your performance, you are free to pursue what truly matters, and then comes endurance, perhaps the clearest evidence that trust has taken root. Because when storms rage, when losses pile up, when strength runs low, something has to carry you forward, and information is not enough, emotion is not enough, theories are not enough. Only trust can carry a soul through long suffering, through seasons where there is no end in sight, through prayers that seem unanswered, through promises that feel delayed. Endurance is not stoicism. It is not mere survival. It is not putting your head down and pretending nothing hurts. Endurance is the active, determined choice to remain when everything else says to leave. It is standing firm not because you have all the answers, but because you believe that the foundation is sure. Trust sustains that kind of endurance. It reminds the soul, you are not forgotten. This is not the end. You can keep walking. And so you klimping maybe, but not quitting. There is something beautiful about the endurance that flows from trust. It is marked by gentleness, by perseverance without panic. It is slow but steady. It is not loud, but it is unmistakably strong, and it is contagious. Others see it and wonder, how do they keep going? The answer is trust. Not in the self, not in circumstances, but in something stronger, something surer, and that trust becomes a testimony. This kind of endurance builds a track record. Each time the soul chooses to keep going, trust deepens, and each trial becomes a monument of memory, a reminder that even when things were dark, you were sustained, that history of endurance becomes a reservoir for future battles. When the next storm comes, the soul remembers the last one. And it says, I've been here before. I was not alone then. I will not be alone now. And this is where the transformation becomes most evident. Over time, the person who walks in trust becomes different. Their presence becomes stabilizing. They are not thrown off by every crisis. They are not enslaved to the opinions of others. They are not frantically trying to prove themselves. They are settled. They are grounded. And not because life has been easy, but because they have been shaped by something deeper than ease. They love more freely because they are not using others to validate themselves. They serve more joyfully because their identity is not wrapped up in recognition. They lead more humbly because they know that strength is a gift, not a right. They weep more deeply because they have learned not to hide from pain, and they rejoice more honestly because they know the cost of joy. This is what trust does. It makes people whole. It makes them resilient, not invincible, but steadfast, not immune to sorrow, but anchored in it, and that anchoring becomes a witness. Others look and see not perfection, but consistency. Not flashy charisma, but quiet confidence. And in a world addicted to noise, that quiet is deafening. It speaks of something real. So few walk this path. Many hear the invitation to trust, but shrink back, because trust requires surrender. It requires giving up control. It requires dying to self, and that death is not easy. It feels like loss, but it is the only way to life. Only in the relinquishing does the transformation begin. Only in the letting go does the reshaping occur. Only in the surrender does the strength to endure take hold. You will not drift into trust. You will not coast into transformation. It must be chosen. Again and again, in the small things and the great, in the moments that no one sees, in the choices that feel insignificant, in the decisions that tear you in two, trust must be fought for, but once it is found, once it takes root, it will never leave you the same. It will not shield you from hardship, but it will sustain you through it. It will not eliminate sorrow, but it will transform it. It will not give you all the answers, but it will give you peace even without them. That peace is priceless. That transformation is worth everything. And even if the world never applauds it, even if your journey is hidden and hard, even if your name is forgotten by history, trust will not be wasted. It will shape you into someone who is not swayed by trends or threats, someone who knows what matters and clings to it, someone who walks not by sight, but by the strength of something unseen, someone whose life speaks, not with volume, but with weight. This is the work of trust. It is deep, it is real, and it is available not to the strongest, not to the smartest, but to the surrendered, to the willing, to the ones who say, even here, even now, I will not give up. I will believe, I will endure. Because trust transforms the heart, reshapes ambition, and sustains endurance, and that changes everything.